what I'd like to do now is, again, have you take everything off of your laps, if you will, and just put both feet on the ground. And I'd like to close out this session with a song that I often use. It's a song that, if you ever want to know how to raise your energy level, some people have been asking about this CD, Cecilia. This CD is like spiritual solution to every problem for me. I told you there's energy in the photograph of that book on that cover. I know that there's energy because I know what had just transpired. There's also energy in this. And I have this in my car, and I set it at number 6. And I play this song virtually every day, particularly if I'm in traffic and I want to see if I can make the traffic move. I'm serious. Because remember, I said, have no limitations on what you think you can possibly do and create. Have no limitations on that at all. You can make traffic move. And especially if I feel myself upset about something, or if I'm not feeling quite well, or if my partner caused us to lose another tennis match, or whatever, I put on this song. It was a song, I've been calling it higher energy, I've been calling it faster energy. I encourage you to have this, because I believe one of the ways that we can raise our levels of consciousness and raise our energy, one of the ways to do that is through music. And in The Eye of the Eye, Hawkins speaks about different kinds of music and different songs as calibrating at different levels. And some music calibrates very low and weakens us, particularly rap and gangster rap kind of music and things like that. It literally weakens everyone who's in the energy field of it. And you know that because there's certain kinds of things that are not only strident to you, but you can feel yourself feeling less peaceful and feeling more anxious when you're in the presence of it. This song was written in the 18th century by John Newton. It's a song that my daughter sings at the end of every PBS special. It's called Amazing Grace. And he was a slave trader, 22 years old, crossing from Senegal in West Africa to go into South Carolina. And in the midst of a storm, he heard these words come to him. I once was lost, he said, and now I'm found. And it was grace. And he called this moment of Satori, his moment of finding God. And when the storm was over, the next day, he turned his ship around. And he went back to Africa. And he unloaded all of the people who he had intended to sell into slavery, and went back to England and became the most ardent abolitionist on the planet for the next 55 years until he was 77 years old. John Newton worked to abolish slavery in one moment, in one instant of Satori. And it's sung by Cecilia, who has one of the most beautiful voices I've ever heard. And she's accompanied by the whales on this, particularly throughout the whole CD. This CD is a consciousness raiser, and that's why I have it available at all of my talks. And here she is, Cecilia. She's from Norway, the land of the midnight sun. And she sings Amazing Grace, accompanied by the whales, who are said to be the record keepers in the spiritual community, because they're in the same bodies they were in 1 million years ago. love that line. I once was lost, and now I'm found. And I interpret that always to mean I once lived in those lower energies of resentment and justified them. And now I bring the energy of grace to the presence of everything. And that song always just seems to bring me up. That's why I asked my daughter to sing it. And it's why I wanted to play it for you here today. Any thoughts? Yeah.
Yesterday, we talked, and I mentioned that I also grew up with an alcoholic stepfather who, always told me that I'd never amount to anything or never be anything. And recently I sold my business and ordered a new car with the intentions of driving out to his grave and urinating on it. Now, you're telling me I'm going to have to go out there and pray for him. Am I correct? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
I think that, first of all, urine is part of the natural juices, so it's not. It's only bad because we just interpret it to be bad. Some people use it to heal, in other parts of the world, and some people even drink it, as a healing. But I think that the relevance of that question, and I think it's a good one, is because I wanted to do that too, is that our greatest teachers are not the people who agree with us, and many times the most powerful and important teachers in our life. In fact, you might only be where you are today and have that car because this teacher came along. And who's to know? Now think about this. Who's to know in an infinite universe in which there's no beginning and no end, how many lifetimes we get? If it's infinity, you get as many as it's, there's no number that you can place on it. And who's to know that, one little lifetime, that this stepfather of yours, like my father, just signed up and said, I remember Betty Eadie writing about this in one of her books and saying that somebody had incarnated onto this plane in order to sit as a bum in front of a particular office entrance in order to have someone walk by and see them and develop some compassion that they didn't have before. And he said, I'll take a lifetime to do that. And who's to know that this stepfather didn't incarnate into this world to talk to you about what a jerk you were and to put all of these kinds of negative thoughts into your mind in order to teach you how to transcend your own your own anger and your own hatreds and your own lower consciousness, your own levels. And that perhaps, I've often said that the people who can push your buttons and the people who can send you into those lower places are your greatest teachers that you'll ever have, because they teach you that you haven't mastered yourself yet. And when you haven't mastered yourself, what that means is you still don't know how to choose peace in response to their hostility, in response to what they have done. And they keep pushing you, And they never go away, they never disappear. I call them, they're like turds that won't flush. They just keep coming back and coming back and coming back. He may have been the person that is most responsible, like my own father might have been the person most responsible, because I wanted to prove something and I needed to forgive. And maybe he showed up just to teach me to forgive. And when I did, everything in my life turned around. Everything. So I'd send him some flowers on his grave. Yeah.
Does forgiveness mean you have to accept someone back into your life, or can you forgive someone at a distance?
It has nothing to do with whether they're there present physically or not. Nothing to do with that at all. Forgiveness is an act of the heart. What you're talking about is an act of the feet. Whether they're going to be there or not going to be there. Forgiveness is an act of the heart. It takes place in here. And many times, the people that you have to forgive, it's like everybody in your life is like a character in a play. Okay? So the character in the play, some of them are in for the first act, and some of them are in for the first two acts. Some are in for the whole play. All right? And some just make entrances and then they leave. And some have roles to play that are not quite as salubrious as you would like them to be. But they're all just characters in this play called your life. And it doesn't mean that If someone, let's say you were married to someone that was very abusive and hostile to you, you got to be able to still send them love. That's what it's all about. But you don't have to stay with them. You don't ever have to be a victim. They have played out. They were in the first act or the first two acts, but they're not in the third act or the fourth act. They're not there any longer. It's just a play. All the world is a play, is a stage, and we're just actors on that stage. Yeah, any others? Yes.
We had a mother and her two daughters struck by a motorist whose car went out of control in front of our school building about a week and a half ago. And the thing that I was impressed with was the father who I spoke with was praying for that motorist as well as for his wife and the three children. And at the celebration of the life, we sung Amazing Grace, so I'm very touched.
You just saw the hockey, did you see the hockey trial? And the man who got manslaughter and for beating up this other man, the man's father, who lost his son to the brutality of this particular man, put his arm around the man and said, "I forgive you. I forgive you." There's never any peace unless you do. Because if you have that hatred and you carry it around with you for the rest of your life, you can't justify a resentment. It's like a snake bite. The bite doesn't kill you, and you can't be unbitten. It's the venom that continues to pour after the bite that is deadly. You have a choice about the venom that continues to pour after you've been bitten. You can't be unbitten, but you certainly don't have to have the venom.
Again, I understand forgiveness, but you say forgiveness has to come from the heart, and I agree with that. But if you feel so hurt over something, how do you get that forgiveness to how do you feel it in your heart? I can say it, I can articulate it, but I don't always have that feeling that I'm really doing it.
Our feelings come from our thoughts. And you just think it enough until the feeling energy begins to materialize for you. You think it enough. You just keep thinking it. And eventually you will feel what you are thinking. That's why I tell people who are trying to do anything that is difficult, just keep saying it over and over again.
I'd like to share something to you and some other folks have said something or asked questions. I'm in recovery from addiction, and we know that we aren't allowed the luxury of justified resentments because they kill. And early on, I was taught to get rid of them, to pray for the people I had resentments towards. And that's the absolute last thing that I wanted to do. And the people who suggested this to me told me, you don't have to really mean it. That just get on your knees and pray for these people to have everything that you want for yourself. And I am here to tell everybody in this room that the act of doing that releases the anger, releases the resentment, and the emotions would turn to neutral and then even to love. And when you asked, do you really have to mean it? For me, I did not have to mean it. But by doing it, I eventually did mean it.
It's a very good point. It can be summarized with fake it until you make it. We're going to do the last three principles today, but I want to have a ceremony here this morning. Anyway, there's a gentleman that's been here with us who, his name is John. He's standing right next to me. Many of you, I'm sure, have met, who has severe disability and was told certain things that he would never be able to do. And it really fits in with this very first principle today. So this eighth principle is called treat yourself as if you already are what you would like to become. One of the most important things I think you can learn in life, and particularly for young people just starting out in life. But it's important for all of us. And I think that's something that John has done. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to John. He's going to do a little performance here for us for the first 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll get started.
Good morning. It's a thrill to be here. This is a 24-year process for me to be here in this room with you. When I was 4, I was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis, which, if you don't know, is a chronic pulmonary disease. To this day, it's the number one genetic killer of young children in this country. About 30,000 Americans have it. And at that time when I was 4, unbeknownst to me, the doctor said, well, he's going to live to about 12. So if you would just go out and just love him and embrace him and just push him, we'll see how far he can go. And so Mom and Dad, with that instruction, put me on a soccer field thinking running was a really good thing, and put me in a swimming pool because swimming was a really good thing. And I had this idea that I wanted to play drums, and the doctor said, well, why don't we try trumpet and see if that happens. And so I started playing trumpet in about 3rd grade, and this disease that was supposed to take my life, for some reason, stayed dormant. And it was a true gift that out of the 700 genotypes of cystic fibrosis that there are, and I have the worst of that the pulmonary restrictions stayed absolutely dormant. And so I ran, and I swam, and I played, and I sang, and I was fortunate enough to excel in most of those things, and life seemed pretty good. And at 12 years old, Mom and Dad thought, well, let's just keep pushing him, and so just competition after competition after competition. And finally I got to 19, and looking back, what Mom and Dad were really doing was raising a no-limit child, that there were no restrictions, that there were no limits of what someone could accomplish, regardless of what medical technology said was going to happen. And so at 19, I took it upon myself to become a no-limit partier rather than a no-limit person. And freshman year of college, I decided that I would try just about anything and everything that was out there. And suddenly, what was once dormant became dominant. And this disease just rose up and bit me. And at that point, I went from the ability to run 5 miles a day, swim 2 miles a day, bike 10 miles a day, to not being able to walk 30 feet to that door without passing out. Cystic fibrosis is a disease that fills your lung up with that same dark green phlegm crap that you have when you have pneumonia or bronchitis. And in there is a bacteria that eats away at your lung linings. So that slowly, from the day you're born, in most cases, that phlegm builds up and destroys your small airways and destroys your medium airways and then eventually destroys your large airways to where you suffocate. So at 19, my life changed drastically. I was a first trumpet player at a well-known university as a freshman. The world was in front of me. My goal was to be on the Tonight Show band with Doc Severinsen and Johnny Carson. And suddenly that wasn't available to me. And I went into the hospital and changed schools and got out, and 3 weeks later was back in the hospital and got out, and a month later was back in the hospital. And the doctors came to me at that time and said the progression of this disease happened so rapidly that a life expectancy of about 3 years is what I would expect. And I said, but what about trumpet playing? And they said, well, if you're going to die in 3 years, what's the sense of continuing to practice? And that was how harsh it was. It was an expectation that that was where I was going to go. And that third hospitalization, I was sitting there and had a pretty prayerful life and was praying for an answer, some sort of guidance that would wake me up, that would give me some sort of roadmap how to work my way out of this. Because after all, I hadn't died when I was 12. Why should I really die when I was 19? And so I was sitting there, and I'd watched Johnny Carson every night since I was 9 or 10, waiting for that ultimate moment with Doc would get a solo, which he never did get a solo. Carson would always say, we're going to have Doc, and I'd stay till 1:30, and we never had Doc. And then one night, as I was there in the hospital, this man walked out with this book called Your Erroneosomes. And within a week, I had that book. And Pull Your Own Strings, and Sky's the Limit. And then came those first set of tapes from Cleveland, right? Well, I took those tapes and I did dupe them and had them in the car and had them in my Walkman and absolutely owned the knowledge that my thought was the miracle that came was that I was watching Johnny Carson that night. And I can recite to you every humorous point in there and every serious point, whether it's the parachutist that forgot he had a cold until he got back in the car, or the ant with a bad merge genes, and the adult student that you made collect butterflies. And I took that knowledge and I said, if this is possible to think in terms of no limits, then why should I limit myself by what the medical doctors say? After all, I'm as wise as they are. I'm as intelligent as they are. They're just older with a little bit more money and a degree. And so if that's their opinion, I'm going to draw a line in the sand, and I intend to beat this disease. So with that, I went off on my own and made mistake after mistake until I found a path of waking up every day knowing that I was winning. And over the years, everybody would walk into me and say, but how is it you do that? What's your strength? How is it that you got from facing death to living life at this level of enjoyment? And for years I would say, Wayne Dyer saved my life. And it wasn't probably till 5 years ago, 19, 29, 17, 18 years ago, where suddenly it dawned on me that Wayne hadn't saved my life. What he had done is given me tools to choose life over death. And the gift isn't that I'm still here. The gift is that in choosing life over death, that I've been able to be of service to a multiple of people in hospitals that I would never have had the opportunity to meet before. 10-year-old roommates, parents of newly diagnosed children with CF, staff members with family critical problems that come into the room and through my presence or my joy walk away different. And the gift of service is truly the gift that you brought to me. This summer I was with one of the largest entertainers in the world who was facing his health problems, and he was in the hospital, and he came into the room, and we sat there knee to knee for an hour. And at 75 years old, he wanted to know at that point in his life how I did this. Do you want to give up? Ever? No. Do you get up every day and do this? Yes. 4 or 5 hours of treatments every day. 100 years of hospitalizations every year. Where does that come from? And a man that had been an inspiration for my entire life in the entertainment business suddenly heard he needed to go pick up some Wayne Dyer books because he was facing his own challenges at that point in his life. These last 6 months, since September 11th, I've had some personal issues that just rocked my inner peace and rocked my spiritual world to the depth of areas that I haven't been till I was 19. This Christmas was the first time I was hospitalized. No family, no friends. I'd lost a best friend with CF in October. I'd lost a 14-year relationship in November. And here I was in a hospital facing for the first time what it was like to worship on Christmas alone. But during that holiday season, when I was struggling for this inner peace and struggling for this spiritual guidance, I turn on the television and who do I see but doing a PBS special? Wayne Dyer. And as you said yesterday, the teacher is always available when you're ready to learn. So I would just like to share with you that whatever adversity that's challenging you today, own it. Embrace it. Be spiritual about it. Because you never know the next day how you face that adversity is going to impact somebody else. And in return, impact somebody else. And that's the gift. The struggle day to day is not a problem. It's the gift that makes the struggle worthwhile. So thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, John. Thanks, John. So you picked the one instrument that you need lung power for to play. John's going to play the trumpet for us when he recollects himself, after this session. That was great. I never like to take the credit for anybody's movement along the path, because if you take the credit, you got to take the blame. I've often said that you see a lot of bumper stickers around the country that say, if you can read this sign, thank a teacher. But I've never seen one that says, if you can't read this, blame a teacher. So you're right. I think of what I do and the work I've done and the books I've produced and the tapes and so on as very much like the manual in your car. When you get a flat tire, which I just did recently, in a rent-a-car on Maui, out in the middle of nowhere after being on horses all day. You reach into the glove compartment and there's a little manual, and if you wait for it to fix the flat, you're going to sit there for a long time But if you open it up and take what's in there and apply it, you put on that little donut and get yourself a new car the next day. And a bill from them as well, by the way. So thanks, John, and I appreciate your words. You're very eloquent. You mesmerize this audience, and they will be words that will inspire people, not just for the next few years, but hundreds of years from now, when our children's 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 children are coming along. These words will be, and your words will be available to them. That's always the beauty of putting things out there, is that you create a permanent record for humanity. And you just never know. There might be some unborn soul who will decide that cystic fibrosis isn't something that they have to die from 1,000 years from now. Thanks. Okay, this principle that I would like to speak about now is called treating yourself as if you already were what you'd like to become. And it's one of the things that we had when we were very young and oftentimes lose. Children are very good at this, at acting as if, just acting as if. My children are masters of this. They see themselves in their own minds as having what it is that they would like to attract into their lives. And they are able to get a picture of that. And in the process of getting that picture, they begin to act as if that picture were absolutely their reality. Now, one of the essays that I wrote in Wisdom of the Ages was based upon an observation of one of the most learned and brilliant teachers that ever came into my life. He was born in 1842. He died in 1910. His name was William James. And he came from a very famous family. Henry James, his younger brother, was one of the most famous novelists of all time in America. Many consider William James to be the father of modern psychology, the person who really began the whole idea of that the mind has some much more control over our bodies and our physical world than we ever thought of. And he had this to say, this is a direct quote of his. He said, there is a law in psychology, a law, that if you form a picture in your mind of what you would like to be, and you keep and hold that picture there long enough, you will soon become exactly as you have been thinking. He didn't say it was a high probability. He didn't say that it was likely or that it might happen. He said if you can figure out a way to form a picture in your head of what it is that you would like to become, it has to materialize. I remember as a young boy speaking about The Tonight Show, watching Steve Allen. Night after night or night. We had a little Admiral television, a little black and white, about 12-inch screen. And I would sit there and watch Steve Allen night after night after night. And while I was watching, I would picture myself as one of the guests on the show. And I would ask, I would get up the next night, I'd talk to my brothers and I'd talk to my mom, and I'd say, you know, when I do The Tonight Show, and they ask a question like that, I'm not going to answer it the way they did. I'm going to make it really come alive. And when I meet Steve Allen, and they would always say, oh God, that's Wayne. He's always such a dreamer. You're not doing The Tonight Show. You're just a little dork, as my brother would say, and just get used to it. And it wasn't like I would argue with them or I would have fights with them or I would try to persuade them of something to the contrary. It wasn't like that at all. I just always had the picture. I would have the same picture when I was in high school And I'd sit there. I remember having a history teacher. I'm debating. I won't give his name, but I remember it very well. I was in room 309, and it started at 2:05 in the afternoon. So you can look it up. And this man was so beaten down by the years and years of teaching history in a high school in Detroit. And I used to go into that classroom, and I'd sit there, and I'd think, when I do this, when I'm in front of a classroom, I will never, ever bore a group of people the way this man is doing. I just won't do it. I used to think, he's got an entire audience. They're captive. They can't even leave if they want to. And he could be so funny, and he could be so interesting. He could make this come alive. There's so many ways he could make American history, it was world history, just become exciting and so on. And instead, he just sits there and he's just beaten down. But I used to feel sorry for him. I did it in college in a 1,000 or more dull lectures of professors who were just coming in there and just sort of going through the motions. And I used to think, boy, when I'm doing this, when I'm in front of college audiences and when I'm teaching, I'm just going to make sure that when I get that classroom, that they're going to want to come to my class. And sure enough, when I taught in high school, it was fun. My kids loved coming to class. And when I taught at the university, when I taught at St. John's University, the biggest problem I had with the dean at the university was that she called me down into her office and said, you're going to have to stop having people come as guests into your classes on Tuesday and Thursday nights because they're taking up all of the parking places at the university. Because I had a class of 30 or 40 students, and there were times when 200 people would show up. And I was taping those lectures to create a book called Your Erroneous Sounds. And I wrote it from those lectures that I had accumulated, and I taped everything. And I did most of it just from my heart. But I would use a form of entertainment and having people have fun and making it come alive and making it exciting and so on. And then after years of, after Erroneous Sounds was published, and I was told by so many people about all the reasons why it was just another book on the list, and that there wouldn't be a second printing, that if we sell these out, there were 7,500, I think, books in the first printing, and if we sell those, that would be considered a successful publishing experience. And I had a different picture in my mind. And it had nothing to do with what I was being told by all of the publishers and people in New York. It had to do with that inner burning desire that I spoke about earlier. But it was a picture. And I saw myself as already doing what it is that I wasn't doing yet. And that's where I was. And so I consequently, when I couldn't get the kind of action that I wanted from them in terms of distribution, and I couldn't get them to even think about a second printing, I just became a bookstore. And I filed with the state authorities in New York and became a commercial establishment. And from that commercial establishment, I made a telephone call and ordered up the entire first printing that was left and had them shipped to my garage. And they ordered 2,500 more copies, and when I called up 2 or 3 weeks later and said, how's the book doing? And they said, oh, for gosh sakes, you're always asking questions. I was just a big pain in the ass to everybody there. And I had already ordered the second printing to be sent to my garage as well. And the publisher looked at it and said, boy, this book is really selling. It's really doing well. Meantime, I had almost 10,000 books there that I had to do something with. And I took those books literally. I took those books out and across the country, and I spoke all over the country and went to every small station and wherever anybody would take me. And it just kept doing it and doing it, going from one to the other. And I left one day. I was driving along the Long Island Expressway on my way from my home in Huntington to the university, and I realized that I couldn't do what I was doing any longer. Even though I had a guaranteed position for the rest of my life, I had a different picture in my head. and I didn't have the same internal enthusiasm for what I was doing any longer. I walked into the dean's office and I resigned. And she just told me that this was the most insane thing she'd ever heard. You're a rising star. You've published a couple of textbooks. Now you've got a book that's out there. We want to keep you here. And I said, no. I said, I've got to go. She said, well, what are you going to do? She said, jobs are very hard to come by. And college professor jobs at that time were very, very difficult to come by. And I said, I'm going to go out and talk about and do the things that I know I have to do. And I went out, and all of the worries and all of the fears, I just let them go because I knew it was time. And got in my car, took my family with me when I could, drove up and down the coast, did all-night radio shows. Many times I did 14, 15 interviews in a day, and drove and found a way to get there myself. Found like-minded people who supported me. People in the publishing world. I had a publicist. Her name was Donna Gould, and Donna just devoted herself to me for about 6 or 7 months, worked without any pay, called from her own phone at night, booked me into all of these different... she must have called the Phil Donahue show 50 times, talking about it, and they always said, no, if you ever call here again and that we hear the name Wayne Dyer, we'll never let you call us again or have any business to do with us. And finally, something very strange happened. Someone who became a friend named Howard Papish picked up a copy of Your Erroneous Zones at a party out in New York. And on the way back to Los Angeles, he was a talent coordinator for The Tonight Show. He called after he read it and asked if I'd like to come out and do an interview, a pre-interview. And I went out and I did a pre-interview, and I was on the Tonight Show that Monday night with, it was the last Monday in August of 1976. And I was on with a man named Shecky Green, who was a comedian, a Las Vegas comedian. And I went on the show and had 20 minutes in what was called the author spot, when the show was 90 minutes at that time. And it was a wonderful experience. And then I went back to the airport at LAX, and I got a telephone call. They paged me and said that Bob Dole at the Republican National Convention in Kansas City, Missouri, had gone over in his address to the convention. And NBC had decided to cover it so that my show, for the first time in the Tonight Show history, had been preempted. And they weren't going to air it. And it was this big disappointment. I went back to where I was in New York, and apparently on Tuesday they have a meeting with all the talent coordinators and Johnny Carson, and Johnny said, well, I heard there was a guest on last night that everyone was talking about. If he was that good, why don't you see if he'd like to come out and do the show tomorrow night? I got on an airplane and flew all the way back out to California on Wednesday. This time there was a limo there to pick me up and drove me to the show. And I did the show on Wednesday night. I was on for about 5 or 6 minutes. And Johnny said, well, you know, we really didn't have very much time to get into this. He said, would you be willing to stay over until Friday? And we can continue the show and talk if you could stay over on Friday. And I said, no. I said, I'm sorry, but I've got screen doors at home that I have to be cleaned, and I've got important things to do. No, I didn't say that at all. And I stayed over on Friday, and I did the Tonight Show again on Friday. So now I had gone from not one single exposure on national television. I had just been touring the country myself. They decided to air the preempted show that was supposed to air the previous Monday on this Monday. And now I had 3 Tonight Show appearances in 4 days, in 4 shows. And that was the beginning of so many of the things that happened. And the first day out there, on the very first show that I was ever on with Shecky Green, the man who was the first guest on the show was standing outside a bank of telephones. And he was on the phone talking to his wife. And I was on the phone right next to him, talking to my wife back in New York and telling her, you're not going to believe who's the first guest on this show. And she said, who? I said, here, listen. And I took the microphone and I put it right in his face. And it was Steve Allen. And I met him and talked to him and became a fan of his, and he became a fan of mine and promoted a lot of my books before he passed away recently. And it's that whole idea of if you get a picture and you can't let go of that picture, that the only thing you can do is act upon that picture. But it isn't just your acting upon that picture that is the essence of this particular principle. It is that something happens. As Patanjali put it, dormant forces come alive. Forces that are cooperating with you, that you can collaborate with. And when you begin this collaboration process, these forces begin to work with you rather than against you. Carl Jung called these forces and this experience of having a collaboration almost with fate, he called it synchronicity. That is, that there is some kind of a synchronization that begins to take place with this power that you have to picture or to visualize or to create images, which is really an energy. You know, when you look at this thing called synchronicity, what we're discussing, what I'm talking about here is getting a picture that is so strong and then always acting as if you were already that picture. It's almost as if there's a time in your life when you have this thing called enlightenment, only it's through suffering. So that what you do is you have an experience, and 10 years go by, and then you look back and you say, oh, now I know why I had to go through that experience. That divorce, that marriage that I was in that didn't work out, that business that failed, that illness that I might have had, that struggle that took place in my life, the whatever it might be, you look back on it and you say, I needed to go through that in order to get to this place. And the truth is, as I said earlier, every experience you ever had in your life, you had to go through in order to get to the next place, because the evidence is that you did. And that's all you need to know. You did. But that's one kind of enlightenment that is very, very troubling and very difficult, because you don't get that many 10-year periods. You know, you get 4 or 5 of those, your life is over. So you don't want to have to spend your life always having experiences, having these things come into your life, suffering enormously through them, continuing to attract more of that into your life, because all you're doing is getting to a place where you finally look back upon it, so your vision is always backward. It's always looking back and saying, oh, that's why I had to do that. Oh, now I understand. Oh, that's when I get it. And then you get to your deathbed and you say, I had to go through all of those things and all I got was to this place. But then there's another form of enlightenment in which, while these things are going on in your life, while the struggle is there, while the illness is there, while the breakup is taking place, while the bankruptcy is in your life, whatever it might be, while it's happening, instead of you saying, I'm not going to anymore, wait a few years and then look back upon this, instead I'm going to ask myself in the moment, what is it that I can learn from this right now? What is the lesson here? And you begin to open yourself up to, I'm going through this for a reason now, and I'm looking for the lesson, and so you use a different energy. You sort of connect to God or to this higher force, these higher, faster energies, in a way in which you ask for guidance now to get you through it, so that you don't have to have all of this suffering that goes with it. All right? That's the second way. But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about a third way. This is called synchronicity. And synchronicity is where you don't have to have an experience and look back upon it, and you're not looking for the answer in what is happening right now. You are able to get out in front of your life, and you are able to see it coming before it arrives. And you are able to put your attention on something called intuition and insight. And this intuition and insight is available to you. And this intuition and this insight is the energy behind creativity, behind the process of creation itself. And so now you are always out here watching as your life is unfolding, and you have become the witness to it. But more than being the witness to it, you start to access higher energies and higher frequencies. One of the quotes and observations that I love from a woman I love very much, her name is Valerie Hunt. And Valerie has written many, many books. Brilliant woman, taught at UCLA for many years. And here's one of her observations. She said, we discovered that when a person's field reached higher vibrational states, he no longer experienced material things such as bodies and ego states or the physical world. He experienced knowing higher information, transcendental ideas, and insight about the ultimate sources of reality and creativity in its purest form. Thoughts became grander, more penetrating, and global. And all of this is the result of reaching a higher energy field. Now, in some of the earlier principles here in this program, I talked about energy moving from low to high. And the lowest energy is the world of form, and then the energy of sound, a faster vibration, then the energy of light, and the energy of thought, and ultimately the energy of spirit. And spiritual energy is the energy of love and forgiveness and peace and kindness and joy. So that when we are able to bring these higher, faster energies to the presence of the lower ones, they nullify and dissolve them. It's one of the ultimate principles that I'm attempting to get across in this program. That you have always got access to these higher energies, and they're only a thought away. They're just a thought away. And don't ever ask me how to do it. But I can show you. Is there anyone in this room and anyone listening who cannot get a picture of those airplanes flying into the World Trade Center? How many times did we see that on television after those events of the 11th of September? So just picture that. Just get that picture and of that building crumbling and those 3,000 or 4,000 people trapped inside. Just picture that. It's a very low energy picture, isn't it? Okay. Now change the picture. And instead of thinking of that and observing that, just get a picture of a dozen red roses in a vase with baby's bummies or whatever it is, baby's breath, that white stuff behind it. All right? And just get a picture of 12 long stem roses in a green vase with that little baby's breath behind it. Is there anyone who can't do that? Anyone in the room or listening who can't change the picture from one of anger and hatred and terror to one of love and beauty? So my question back to you is, how did you do that? And the answer is, there's no one on this planet who can explain it. You just do it. You change the pictures. And when you do change the picture, you change the energy, and you change whether it empowers or weakens you, as I'll be talking about in the 10th principle. So, what I'd like to suggest about synchronicity is that there are various levels of connectors. That is how we are connected to things. If I were to have a little pull toy up here, and I had a string on the pull toy, and I were to take the string and attach it to the toy, and I were to pull the toy behind me, you would say, the reason that the toy is moving is because of the string, which is connected to it, and the energy that you are using to pull it, right? And so the connection between something moving that I am holding in my hand and understanding it is really quite basic and quite simple. It is just simply form to form, connectors. This is why when you do this, this is what happens. Pretty simple and pretty easy and pretty basic. And then if I were to say to you, well, what about the connection between having a thought, which is invisible, and scratching my nose? And you say, well, that's actually pretty simple. You have a thought, and then you move your finger in a certain way until it reaches your nose, and you scratch it. And you say, the connection is between the thought and then the movement of your hand. And you say, well, that's actually pretty basic, but it's pretty complicated. It's pretty amazing that such a thing exists, because we don't know what a thought is. We know that we have a command center inside of our brain someplace, and we can find scientists who can tell us where that command center is, but there's nobody out there who can tell us where the commander is, who's in the command center. We can't find that with any of our instrumentation, but we still know I can have a thought. So there's a connection between having a thought and the action of that thought. And that's not too complicated, even though none of us can explain it. And then we have another kind of connector, which is a connector between my thought and the next thought. So that I'll be sitting at my writing table, and I'll have a thought about what I would like to write, and I'll start writing, and then I'll have another thought about what I'll do after I do that, and then I'll have another thought, and now I've got connectors that are existing between one thought and another thought. And we can't even find a thought, let alone the next thought, let alone describe what the connection is between the two of them, but there's nobody listening that doesn't understand that such connections exist in the universe, even though we can't prove them, we can't find them. They seem to elude us when we try to measure them. But there are still connectors between one thought that I have and another thought that I have. And most people can accept that and go through their life saying, yeah, I have this thought, then I have that thought, then I have another thought, and then I act upon that thought. All right? Now the connectors start to become even more intriguing, and this is where Jung comes in, where he spoke about synchronicity, because there is a connection between your having a thought and the form of another human being. Now all of you mothers in this room, and all of you fathers who are listening, who have to be responsible when the mother is out of the house, or when you are responsible for the children, know, and I've seen it happen with 8 children, and I don't think I've ever talked to a mother who hasn't had this experience, in which they will have a thought that there is something going on with their child, and their child is in another room, or sometimes their child is in another part of the city. It happened with me on many occasions when I'd be out for dinner with my wife, and we would be having dinner, and suddenly she would get up and say, there's something wrong with, or the so-and-so happens to. And every mother that I've ever known has this connection. So many times, when my first daughter was born, when Tracy was born, and I was in my 20s, and I remember we lived in this house, and we slept on one floor, and the baby and Tracy slept downstairs, and we'd be up there, and I would be reading. I was working on my doctorate at that time, and my wife, Judy, was lying asleep next to me, sound asleep. I mean, deep sleep, that kind of breathing, REMs, rapid eye movements. I mean, this is someone who's out. And I would hear Tracy just stir in the other room, just stir. She was just turning. She could never have heard this. She didn't have those kind of ears. And suddenly she would get up and she would say, go check on the baby. And I'd say, wow, I was only in my 20s, but I thought this, what is that? There's a connection between one person having a thought